The war was over. Not with treaties, not with surrender, but with silence. The kind that came after a storm that had torn through mountains and oceans, and left only stillness in its wake. The Zarkrith Dominion no longer existed as a unified power. Their fleets were scattered, their chain of command severed. Entire sectors once branded with the Dominion sigil now stood quiet, lifeless, awaiting reclamation. And Earth? Earth stood untouched. From orbit, it glowed blue and green, like it always had. Not as a fortress or a ruin, but as a reminder. Here lived the species that remembered everything: the blood, the sacrifice, the rage, and the reason. A species that had never wanted war, but had never forgotten it. Atop the United Terran Assembly Tower in New Geneva, the sky was crystal clear. The Terran High Marshal, a woman with silver hair and a steel spine, looked out across the world she had protected, not with armies, but with foresight. The Warburn had returned to stasis. The Velnari had begun their silent departure, vanishing into the folds of deep space without ceremony, like shadows of memory above her. On orbital station, Aegis Crown, anchor point remained active, watching, learning, waiting. It had no ego, no pride, just a directive. Never again. In the quiet following the battle, across the Accord and beyond, the stories began to spread. On distant mining colonies, children played Warburn versus Zarkrith, jumping from crate to crate, making explosion sounds with their mouths. In the libraries of the Avarian, the long-lived scholars wrote new entries in their codices. Terrans, never to be underestimated. Architects of decisive violence, capable of subtlety, brutality, and mercy in equal measure. But the most telling stories didn't come from humans. They came from the survivors. Zarkrith fugitives fled to outer systems, seeking asylum, sanctuary, or just anonymity. Many were turned away. Some found temporary homes in old neutral zones. A few were captured by the Accord and interrogated, not with hostility, but with curiosity. One such interview was broadcast quietly across Accord networks. It showed a mid-ranking Zarkrith fleet officer, skin charred, voice hoarse, eyes vacant. The interviewer, a soft-spoken Filari anthropologist, asked, "What did you learn of them, the humans?" The officer blinked slowly. "They waited," he whispered. "They knew this would come. They always knew. And while we prepared for victory, they prepared for us." He shook his head, trembling, and when it began, they smiled. The feed cut out. The quote spread faster than any official record. They smiled. It became a galactic phrase, spoken with equal parts awe and caution. On black markets and noble courts, in pirate dens and ambassador halls, the legend solidified. The humans had smiled when war returned. They hadn't done it out of bloodlust. Not revenge, not madness, but understanding. As if they had reached across the centuries, pulled the horrors of history into their hearts, and said, "We are ready. Not because we want to fight, but because you left us no choice." A monument was erected at the edge of the Sol system, where the final Zarkrith push had collapsed. It was not a statue of victory or dominance. It was a ring of floating steel shards orbiting a single glowing plaque. The plaque bore only 5 words. "We remember, so we prepared." Among the ruins of the Zarkrith capital, now reclaimed by stars and silence, a rogue broadcast still played from time to time, hacked into drifting relays. No one claimed responsibility. It was a human voice, female, calm. "We are not monsters. We are not saviors. We are not conquerors. We are survivors. That is why we won." And beneath that voice, layered in the background, barely audible, was something else. Laughter. Not mocking. Not cruel. Just human. Free. Defiant. Alive. It haunted those who heard it, because it was genuine. Back on Earth, the High Marshal stood, alone at the base of a Warburn cradle. The chamber was dark now, silent, The soldiers within it were asleep again, perhaps for another 1,000 years. Beside her stood a historian, tablet in hand. "They're already calling it the Second Silence," he said. "The war that wasn't," she nodded slowly. "Good, let them remember it that way." He hesitated. Was it worth it? Waking the old projects? Unleashing Anchor Point? Bringing back the Leviathan? She didn't answer for a long time. Finally, she looked up at the stars. "They needed to know," she said. "The galaxy, the ones watching, the ones waiting for weakness. They needed to remember who we are." The historian pressed record dot, and humanity's message was etched forever into the void. We are not the flames of war. We are the ash that remains after, the hand that rebuilds, the mind that remembers. "But if you bring us fire again," she turned, "we'll teach you how to burn." But something else. Tall, robed figures with eyes like dying suns, creatures of stone and light, once thought extinct. Humanity's only successful interspecies co-creators, the Valnari ascendancy, vanished after the last war. Not defeated, but withdrawn, waiting for the call to return. The Zarquath had assumed the humans stood alone. Now, they watched as ships carved from neutron matter, powered by psionic cores, phased into real space. The Valnari didn't speak. They simply flanked Earth's defenses and began burning. Holes in reality, tearing through Zarquath vessels with weapons that didn't fire projectiles or beams, but silence, conceptual erasure. Ships ceased to be, wiped from existence not by damage but by denial. Dominion war priests tried to pray. No. Gods answered, because this wasn't just a war anymore. This was punishment. Inside the Dominion throne ship, War King Reztal stared at incoming data feeds. His admirals, trembling, begged for retreat. But he could barely speak. His blood had gone cold. In one feed, a human warbird walked through fire. Around him lay the bodies of 3 titans. He dragged a banner behind him, a relic from the last Galactic War, soaked in ancient blood. And he smiled. Another screen showed a Valnari vessel splitting a Dominion cruiser apart with a beam of concentrated memory. Every Zarquath on board died remembering their worst fear. But the worst was a simple message, transmitted from Earth to the Dominion flagship. A child's voice, human. Singing. Soft, slow, a lullaby. "Sleep, my enemy, sleep in the dark," you thought. U.S. soft, you missed the mark. You wanted war. We wrote the book. Now run far, and don't look. And then the voice changed. A whisper. Old, male. Deadly. There's nowhere left to run. That was when the Dominion cracked. Ships fled out of formation. A dreadnought captain broke rank and attempted to hyperskip out of the system, only to skip into a human ambush already calculated for his trajectory. Internal mutinies spread like fire. Some units turned off their weapons and broadcast surrender. Others destroyed their own navigation logs, hoping to flee into the void and never return. The War King stood alone, fists clenched, teeth bared. "I will not yield. We are Dominion." But across the galaxy, his people already knew. They had triggered a war they could never win. And the humans were just getting started. The final battle wasn't announced. It simply began like a door slamming shut in a silent house. The Dominion's last fleet had rallied above Neptune, surrounded by fractured moons and the frozen wreckage of previous failures. War King Reztal, aboard his throne ship Vuruxuan, prepared for a final assault on Earth. Behind him, the remnants of his once unstoppable empire floated in tight formation. 11 dreadnoughts, 30 cruisers, and a handful of scarred titans colossal. Planet-cracking monsters built from Zarquath, pride and desperation. He wasn't just attacking Earth. He was gambling the future of his species on one final strike. Across the system, humanity waited. They had no need to attack. Earth's skies remained calm, its cities untouched, its oceans serene. The human population carried on quiet, yet buzzing with a strange confidence. not defiant certainty. Civilians watched the sky not with fear, but with something older. Memory. Because this had happened before, and they had won before. Anchor point. The war mind orchestrated the defense like a conductor guiding a symphony of annihilation. The Velnari positioned themselves just behind Saturn's shadow, their vessels vibrating with unreleased psionic force. Warburn moved in silence through subterranean rails, preparing for orbital drop. The Zarkroth launched. Their titans moved first like gods. Descending. Their dreadnoughts formed tight formations around the throne ship. Anti-planet bombardments charged. The Dominion believed in dominance through spectacle. They wanted Earth to see them coming. To fear, instead, they met nothing. No counterfire. No pursuit. They crossed Mars' orbit unchallenged. That was their mistake. The moment the lead Titan crossed the Earth-Luna gravity boundary, the trap was sprung. Human stealth satellites, dark, cold, undetectable, activated as one. Each was equipped with Thor-class kinetic rails firing solid tungsten rods at hypervelocity. The lead Titan was hit with 17 impacts in under 4 seconds. Its outer shell cracked. The next volley shattered its spinal reactor. The Titan split in two. And from the dark side of the moon, Earth launched its true response, Project Leviathan. A ship. If it could still be called a ship. It was a constructive fusion of AIs, sentient metals, and something. Older. It had no engines. It moved by folding inertia. Human forces had debated whether unleashing Leviathan was necessary. Anchor Point had decided. It was. Leviathan appeared in the center of the Dominion fleet without warning, a shadow of impossible angles. All sensors failed. Hulls corroded in its wake. Time fractured. Communication ceased. The only broadcast that slipped through came from the Warburn, spoken in solemn reverence. The Old One walks. Every Zarkroth ship that fired at Leviathan missed. Not because of cloaking, but because their weapons refused to lock on. Targeting systems bent away from it. One captain ordered a full self-detonation in panic. His ship vanished. Then Leviathan answered. It didn't fire. It spoke. A sound like the groaning of gravity, carried on modulated Tolkien pulses. Not speech, not quite, but understanding. The Zarkroth heard one word in their own language, in their own minds: enough. 3 cruisers went dead. Just dead, not destroyed. No explosions, no debris. Their engines died. Crews slumped in their chairs, not injured, just unconscious, as if their very will had been removed. Then Earth's counteroffensive began in earnest. From beneath Antarctica, railguns hidden under layers of glacial camouflage fired massive magnetic payloads. They weren't even aimed at ships, they were aimed at specific gaps between them, directing gravitational ripple shocks that forced the Dominion vessels to collide. Above, human drop pods descended. Each one a bullet-shaped comet carrying a single Warburn. They tore through Zarkroth hulls, leaving fire in their wake. Each Warburn had been assigned a specific target: key systems, command bridges, engine cores. The carnage was surgical. One Warburn landed on the War King's own flagship. Inside the Vorak Suan, War King Raztal roared as internal alerts screamed around him. Hull breaches. Systems down, but none of it mattered. He was a warrior. He would fight. And then the Warburn entered the command deck. A human, wrapped in black armor laced with red. Eyes like nova embers beneath a faceless helm. No words were exchanged. Tal lunged with a warblade forged from a fallen star. The Warburn caught it with one hand, crushed it, then drove a vibro dagger straight through the War King's chest. As the great Zarkroth tyrant fell, gasping his final breath, the human whispered, "We told you not to come." The flagship shuddered. Human forces broadcast a single phrase across all frequencies: "The Dominion is finished." The remaining Zarkroth ships, leaderless, half-blind, and terrified, attempted retreat. But the Velnari moved in, cutting off escape vectors with elegant precision. Anchor point allowed a fraction to flee. A message had to be carried. The rest were destroyed. Not with hatred, but with precision. Earth did not celebrate. They simply exhaled. Across the planet, people looked up at the stars. The sky was quiet again. The war was over, and humanity had not lost a single world, because they had never stopped preparing, because they had always remembered. It stepped onto the gray dust without a sound. No fanfare. No thunder, just a shape too tall, broad, armored, faceless. It moved with deliberate weight, as if gravity bowed beneath it. Behind it, more hatches opened in silence. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. A line of figures emerged, each unique, each lethal. Their armor shimmered like obsidian oil, changing hue with every motion. They were not machines, not men, but something in between. Something perfected. The war-born. Each had slept for 3,000 years, held in cold stasis under Earth's crust, in vaults beneath oceans, or frozen into the moon's dark rock. They were humanity's final contingency, living weapons, bred not just for destruction, but dominance. A last echo of a forgotten age. The age when humanity ruled not with bureaucracy, but with force and fear. And now, they were awake. The Zarkrith Dominion pushed forward regardless. War King Rez Tal ordered the full invasion of Sol. 7 armadas, 50 dreadnoughts. Titan's planet killers were pulled from deep storage. The Dominion had faced insurgents, rogue AI, even solar anomalies. But never a species like this. They believed numbers would carry the day. That overwhelming force would drown human cunning. They were wrong. When the Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of Sol, they found the system empty, devoid of human defense formations, no patrols, no resistance. Earth, shining blue and green beneath its thin veil of atmosphere, looked vulnerable. Too vulnerable. The Zarkrith advanced, and the stars blinked out. One by one, what had looked like stars in the background began to shift. They weren't stars. They were ships. Thousands of them, in formations that hadn't moved in 3 millennia. Generational battlecruisers, black-armored titans of steel, each bearing names etched in multiple languages. Remembrance, Grave of Peace, Nightfall Ascending. These were old fleet. Not newly built, but awakened. Each ship had been mothballed in orbit around dead stars, cloaked in gravity nets and folded space, invisible to time and scan. Together, they had been forgotten, hidden by design, locked behind orders that read, only in the event of existential war. Now those orders had been rescinded. The Dominion realized they had triggered something older than themselves. The first engagement was over Jupiter. The Dominion expected to find a few mining colonies, maybe a weak defense station. They found Jovian Bastion, a megastructure disguised as a gas refinery. It unfolded like a metallic flower, revealing banks of planet-sized railguns and hundreds of autonomous drone swarms. The Bastion opened fire. Zarkrith ships were torn apart mid-sentence, hulls sliced cleanly in half. Engines erupted like nova flares. Fighters scrambled, but were caught in net mines. Each pulse fired a localized MEM that left cockpits filled with smoke and panic. Within minutes, the Dominion lost 20% of its forward fleet, but Earth hadn't even responded yet. That came next. From the edge of Saturn's rings, the humans released their Skyhook's orbital tether weapon hybrids, designed to swing kinetic payloads at relativistic speeds. Massive tungsten rods, old tech, brutally simple, rained down across the enemy formation, hitting with enough force to shatter entire dreadnoughts. Zarkrith shields, meant for plasma and energy, couldn't adapt in time. Their ships cracked open like fruit beneath the blows. Then came the counter-assault, Warburn, dropped from stealth transports straight into the Zarkrith fleet. No ships, just suits, riding ballistic arcs through space. Each impact crushed corridors. They breached with their fists, tore open hulls with monomolecular blades. Onboard AI screamed in protest as system after system fell under Warbird control. Inside one dreadnought, security footage showed a single Warbird standing amidst a pile of Zarquath bodies, helmet steaming, breathing slow and calm. When backup arrived, he turned to the camera and smiled. That image spread like a virus through Dominion Command. A dozen fleets hesitated. Officers began questioning orders. One commander requested permission to withdraw. Rez Tal denied it and killed the officer for asking. But the cracks were forming. The Zarquath sent a Titan toward Earth, an ancient war behemoth capable of stripping planetary crust. It breached Mars' orbit and began charging its main weapon, and then Earth answered. From Antarctica rose the Cradle, humanity's last planetary defense weapon. It had never been activated. Not once. It didn't fire lasers or missiles. It folded space. One pulse silent, blue, rippling like a mirage washed over the incoming Titan. The weapon didn't explode. It didn't burn. It simply vanished. Wiped from every record, every sensor, every dimension. Even the Zarquath couldn't track where it had gone. The Dominion began to understand. Humans had not only prepared to win a war, they had prepared to end it with minimal loss, with overwhelming psychological supremacy. Not because they wanted to destroy, but because they wanted to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. The War King screamed from his throne ship. Send everything. Empty the vaults. Burn their worlds if you must. But even as he shouted, some of his lieutenants hesitated. The fear had bloomed fully now, like a cold flower in their hearts, because now they knew this was not the war they had expected. It was a reckoning. The skies over Earth had turned gold with fire and black with wreckage, but the humans weren't worried. They didn't flinch. They didn't scream. They smiled. Zarquath intelligence, what remained of it, attempted to adapt. Countermeasures were deployed. EMP fields, disruptor clouds. They launched specialist hunter-killers designed to track Warbird by their thermal emissions, only to find that Warbird didn't emit heat. They bled cold. Every counter-strategy failed. Every doctrine collapsed. Nothing they brought worked against a species that had been fighting the idea of war longer than the Zarquath had existed. And yet, the humans weren't done. They hadn't even revealed everything that came with the second twist. In a secure vault beneath the Himalayas, once a research base, then a prison, then forgotten. An access code was finally spoken aloud. Not by a general, but by a civilian, a historian. Because only those who studied war truly understood it, had been entrusted with its final keys. The facility powered up. Project Anchor Point. It wasn't a weapon. It was a being. The Dominion had believed humanity's genetic warriors, the Warbird, were the peak of their arsenal. They weren't. Anchor Point had been left behind as a myth, a story told in war colleges and band accord archives. A super consciousness, a fusion of human minds from the Silence conflict, linked by neural webbing. Memory merged across time. Experiences pooled and refined. Not a supercomputer. A superhuman. It had no name. Just voices, plural. A choir of humanity's greatest tacticians, warriors, and war poets fused into one quiet, calculating mind. It didn't sleep. It didn't feel. It only remembered. And it hated waste. When activated, Anchor Point took over. SolarNet, the solar AI mesh that coordinated human defenses. But instead of issuing orders, it simply sent out a message to all human forces. Let them bleed. I will show them what fear is made of. In less than 4 hours, Anchor Point rewrote the entire defense pattern of the solar system. Trap corridors were reorganized. Quantum decoys flooded the void. Human ships that had gone dark centuries ago flickered back online and fired with uncanny synchronicity. It was no longer war. It was an art installation of agony, and the Zarquath were the medium. Entire fleets were lured into artificial gravity wells disguised as moons. Others were baited into collapsing wormholes. Boarding teams that landed on human stations found the corridors shifting in layout, trapping them in endless loops until oxygen ran out. Anchor Point watched and learned. Every Zarkrith tactic became another line in its algorithm. Every ship lost became a lesson exploited. The more the Dominion fought, the faster it lost. And then came the final revelation. The humans weren't alone. In a quiet corner of the galaxy, the transmission was heard. It was ancient, encoded in a dialect that hadn't been spoken in 3 eras. A request, a call to old allies. At the edge of the Perseid drift, a gate opened, and they came. Not machines, not humans. They tried to erase the incident, but one of the scout ships had jettisoned a black box before disappearing. Inside was a final audio log. It played static at first, then laughter. Human laughter, low, joyful, and a phrase spoken in calm English. Just one more reason. On the Dominion's forward assault carrier Gravelash, Zarkrith officers held a meeting behind closed bulkheads. The humans weren't acting like other Accord species. They weren't panicking. They weren't negotiating. They were preparing. Quietly, patiently, worse. They weren't even retaliating directly. They were watching. A captain slammed his fist into the table. "We are warriors. We do not fear shadows." An aide spoke hesitantly, with respect. "It isn't shadows. It's like they've been waiting. Like they've always expected this day to come." The room fell silent. The War King himself, watching from a far secure chamber, growled low. "If they have weapons, destroy them. If they have worlds, burn them. If they have gods, kill them. There will be no fear." But some fear had already taken root. On outposts near Terran space, Zarkrith soldiers reported dreams. Shared dreams. Of black-armored giants standing in fire. Of stars going dark one by one. Of a heartbeat beneath their feet, slow but steady. And a voice whispering, "We are awake." Interrogations revealed similar visions among hundreds of troops. An intelligence officer cross-referenced the phrase and found something odd. Old Accord reports of psychological warfare techniques developed by humans thousands of years ago. Sub-psychic suggestion loops. They called them. Long thought theoretical, but here they were, working. Real. The Dominion's Information Council grew nervous. Human tactics weren't about overwhelming force. They were about belief. They didn't just break enemies. They made them question what was real. And somewhere, buried in a forgotten Accord archive, a report long sealed was unearthed. Written by a Ulathi diplomat during the final days of the last Galactic War. It read, "Humanity does not love war. But they respect it, they remember it, and if it returns, they will not fear it." Back in the dark near Earth's edge, Zarkrith. Scout ships picked up a new signal, simple. A ping, followed by coordinates, followed by 2 words. The Zarkrith. Dominion answered. They assembled their largest battle group, yet 42 warships, including 6 dreadnoughts, 3 gravity lashers, and the Corsaris, a siege-class vessel that had cracked the crust of 3 planets in a single campaign. Their target, the Archean Line, a thin stretch of human-controlled outposts and stations, bordering the Terran core. The humans had never deployed any major force there. No fleet, no command centers. No sign of large-scale defense. It looked like an exposed throat. The Dominion pounced, but the moment the Zarkrith armada crossed into Terran-held space, things went wrong. Navigation systems desinced, star coordinates shifted. Gravitational readings fluctuated as if the region itself had been warped. For 37 minutes, the fleet drifted in what they believed was interstellar territory, until a dead human satellite drifted past their lead. Dreadnought. A 3,000-year-old relic. Still transmitting. "Welcome to Earth's gate. Abandon all certainty." The dreadnoughts launched probes. Half of them failed to return. The others came back different, embedded with foreign code. Human code. That was when the sky tore open. A rift in space shimmered into being, and from it emerged a ship. But not just any ship. The Vengeance Protocol, a legend. Believed destroyed or decommissioned in the early days of the Accord. A ship so advanced that during the last war, it had ended a campaign with a single maneuver, jumping inside the event. Horizon of a black hole, destroying an enemy fleet and surviving. It didn't broadcast warnings. It didn't threaten. It just fired. The first volley wasn't aimed at any vessel directly. Instead, it detonated precision gravity pulse warheads that folded the surrounding space-time, just enough to scatter the Zarkroth fleet's formations. In that moment of disarray, dozens of human ships emerged from stealth strike frigates, angular and silent, covered in adaptive armor and coded in languages no longer spoken aloud. They didn't use traditional weapons. Instead, they hacked enemy engines mid-flight, redirected their own missiles, and flooded ship interiors with non-lethal gas that triggered hallucinations. Zarkroth soldiers turned on each other in confusion, screaming of shadows on the walls, and whispers in the ducts. The humans called it shock fog. Aboard the Karzaris, chaos broke out. Screens flickered with grainy images, old war footage, seemingly random. But every Zarkroth officer watching saw something different. A fear. A memory. A moment of weakness. The command AI screamed warnings. Cognitive intrusion detected. Memory corruption in progress. It was the first time the Zarkroth realized the truth. Humanity hadn't simply prepared for war. They had evolved with it. Their strategy was not just brute force, it was psychological asymmetry. They didn't destroy the body first. They destroyed the will. Admiral Voss, commanding the Vengeance Protocol, finally spoke. His voice echoed across Zarkroth channels. You should have stayed in your corner of the stars. The Zarkroth retaliated with full fury. Plasma arcs, singularity mines, boarding pods. They even launched a dreadnought at relativistic speeds toward a human carrier. But the carrier wasn't real. It was a hollow decoy, built to fool Zarkroth sensor arrays. The dreadnought passed through empty light and crashed into one of their own. Ships. Internal fleet communications failed. Orders contradicted each other. Dozens of ships spiraled out of sync. By the time the Dominion reformed ranks, they'd lost 11 ships and nearly a third of their momentum without a single human. Casualty confirmed. Then the humans made their second move. It wasn't a weapon. It was a signal. A transmission broadcast. Directly into the Dominion's command structure, layered with a cipher no current AI could break. It contained terabytes of encoded memory, a historical account of the last war humans fought, embedded with sensory playback, pain feedback, and emotional resonance. Every Zarkroth who received it lived it. The trenches. The orbital bombardments. The swarm tactics. The Warburn charging through biofire. The moment Earth detonated an entire moon as a strategic distraction, every Zarkroth who watched the data feed came out different. Changed, most vomited, some wept, a few simply shut down their own suits, curled up in the darkness, and whispered a phrase again and again. They smiled while it burned. The Dominion fleet limped away from the Archean line in disarray. No pursuit. No demands. The humans let them retreat, but they left something behind. Each of the Dominion ships found, somewhere in their systems, one new file, a name, not an order, not a threat, just the coding name of a project that hadn't been mentioned in 3,000 years. Not even in Accord myths. Project Oubliette. A Dominion war priest screamed when he read it. He had seen it once, long ago, in a Forbidden's archive. The translation was unclear, but the meaning was certain. The place where we bury what should never return. And then the worst realization of all. Humanity hadn't used any of their ancient super weapons yet. They were just warming up. In the command tower of the Zarkroth capital, War King Reztil crushed the skull of his intelligence minister and shouted across the bridge, "Summon every fleet. Mobilize the Titans. We end them now." But somewhere deep inside, even he felt it a tremor, a whisper, not from his enemies, from his own warriors. They had begun to fear Dot, and across the stars, on the dark side of Earth's moon, a hatch opened. They came from beyond the veil of forgotten stars, a fleet of obsidian warforms shaped like blades and beasts. The Zarkrith Dominion hadn't made contact, they had made entry wounds. Their arrival tore holes in border space and spilled death into the quiet corridors of galactic civilization. Planets that hadn't known violence in millennia now choked on fire and panic, their skies filled with shrieking metal, their people unarmed and unready. The Galactic Accord watched, frozen, stunned. It had been 3,000 years since the last true war. And like all things long dormant, war returned with hunger. The Zarkrith saw peace not as an achievement, but as a weakness. Their species had never known stillness. Born from an irradiated world of poison and predators, they evolved through conquest. To them, diplomacy was delay. Agreement was surrender. And the galaxy, fat with leisure and lulled by the comfort of unity, looked like an untouched harvest of most of the Accord couldn't even process it. They had grown beyond violence. Their militaries were mostly ceremonial, their security systems built to police piracy and meteor strikes. They begged for negotiations, pleaded through every channel. The Zarkrith responded only once, in a broadcast from the throne ship of their war king. No more words, only blood. Within weeks, 3 civilizations had been erased. An insectoid species, known for poetry and glasswork, turned to stardust. The aquatic archives of Nalisur burned in the vacuum as their ocean world boiled. The peace barge of the Kiori elders drifted for days, hull torn open. Its crew long dead, still seated around a negotiation table. But not all species were shocked. On the 3rd rotation of Earth's moon, an old man sat beneath an apple tree, watching the stars. He held a military badge that hadn't seen sunlight in 20 centuries. When the first reports came in, he didn't flinch. He simply whispered, "They're back," and smiled. You see, humans remembered. The Accord had long dismissed Earth as a quiet, nostalgic world. Curious, strange, overly emotional. Their homeworld was quaint and littered with museums. They celebrated obsolete military victories with strange customs reenactments, documentaries, even games. Children trained with sticks shaped like rifles. Adults painted stories of war across walls and screens, even when war no longer existed. It was odd, the other species said. Perhaps a lingering trauma. Perhaps humans had not yet grown out of their primitive obsession. But Earth's museums weren't history. They were warning signs. Cages with broken locks, glass cases that hummed faintly even after millennia. Humanity had not forgotten war. They had studied it, mastered it, archived it like an ancient predator kept in stasis, not to be unleashed. Lightly but never to be forgotten. The Accord sent envoys to Earth after the first wave of Zarkrith attacks. Most other races begged for help from the Technarchs of Sol, the Human Defense Council long dormant in orbit. The humans listened quietly. Their representatives, dressed in black and steel gray, said little. One, a woman with eyes like a storm, asked a single question. "Are you sure this is what they want?" The other diplomats were confused. "Who?" She stood. "The Zarkrith. Are you sure they want a war?" The question was rhetorical. Earth had not disarmed after peace was achieved. They had simply paused. Buried beneath the oceans, hidden in orbit, sleeping in lunar vaults were machines and minds and weapons that had names like myths, Project Thanatos, Echo Protocol, the Cradle of Steel. They were relics not because they were obsolete, but because they were too dangerous to use in peacetime. The galaxy had believed humanity had moved on, but humanity had merely waited. The first direct assault on Human territory was swift. A Zarkroth fleet entered the Terran expanse, an empty section of space with no known colonies. They found no resistance, no defense stations, not even satellites. They'd broadcast a victory message, and then silence. No response. No trace of them. The entire fleet vanished without so much as a distress signal, not a single echo on long-range scans. A second fleet followed to investigate. They too disappeared. A third, larger armada entered orbit over Europa Station, a known human outpost, and prepared a ground strike. The feed went dark. When Accord sensors finally re-established contact, all that remained were chunks of blackened debris and a single transmission pulsing from Europa's ice fields. Status: Teeth awakened. Zarkroth intelligence laughed it off. Psychological warfare, they said. A bluff. Old tech turned back on. But one commander, young, reckless, freshly blooded, reviewed human historical records. He watched grainy, ancient footage of battles fought with impossible weapons. A planet turned to glass. A fleet tricked into destroying itself. The deathless infantry. He paused on a clip. A human, bloodied, smiling in the midst of smoke and ruin. The face seemed calm, not victorious, not enraged, just content. He frowned. Why do they always smile? He asked aloud. No one answered. Far above Earth, deep beneath layers of sensor-disruptive shielding, something old and vast began to hum. Lights flickered on after 3,000 years of darkness. Mechanical arms rotated, targeting systems realigned. A voice, smoother than synthetic silk, whispered to itself. Threat recognized. Initiating response. Welcome back, War. And on the surface of Earth, that same old man, now joined by others in quiet corners of the world, lifted his head, closed his eyes, and smiled. The Zarkroth were not used to questions. They were used to screams. On the 75th day of their campaign into Accord space, their war lines had expanded into 7 systems. Every encounter ended the same domination. Accord races surrendered or ran. Their fleets were soft, predictable, built for ceremony, not combat. The Zarkroth believed themselves righteous executioners, carving purpose back into a galaxy that had forgotten how to bleed. But something was changing. At first, it was small things. Unexplained sensor distortions. Data packets that returned empty but left a tingling feeling in the ship's systems, as if the code had been watched. Scouts started vanishing on the edge of human territory, not during battle, but during routine patrols. No distress calls, no debris. Just absence. Zarkroth generals chalked it up to malfunctions or cowardice. Their warriors were bred for battle, but even they could feel the shift. Subtle, atmospheric. Like walking into a temple, desecrated long ago. It was nothing visible. Just a sense, growing steadily, that something wasn't quite right. Their first proper invasion of a human-aligned system took place at Virux 9, a small moon-ringed world with modest settlements and what appeared to be antique orbital platforms. It was a tactical test. Strike hard, demoralize the humans, make them hesitate. The Zarkroth sent 12 destroyers. The moon's automated systems didn't respond. The platforms didn't even power up. No ships scrambled. It was almost insulting. Until the destroyers reached low orbit. One by one, the ship's internal systems began to fail, not from any visible source, but from inside. Life support shut down. Engines reversed polarity. One destroyer turned on. The others, without a word, opening fire while its crew screamed over intercoms that they were locked out of control, that it wasn't an attack. It was a dissection. By the time the last remaining Zarkroth vessel tried to retreat, the moon itself opened. A false shell peeled away to reveal a massive cannon, primitive by appearance, but devastating in application. It fired once. The retreating vessel never even scattered. The signal came. A minute later. It was a human voice. Calm, male, speaking with an accent the Accord translation banks hadn't heard in centuries. "We told you. You sure you want this?" The Zarkrith Dominion was enraged. The moon was scrubbed from maps. Every recorder of the incident purged from their internal archives. But not before whispers started spreading among their lower ranks. Of ghosts, of traps, of humans who didn't scream when they died, but who laughed, who welcomed pain. Who whispered names of battles from 3,000 years ago as if they had happened yesterday. The war priest Karthsal, a high advisor to the Dominion's war king, tried to suppress the rumors. But even he couldn't ignore what the Watchers had seen. In the human artifact vaults, it began when a scout team entered a derelict orbital museum above Mars, supposedly inactive. The Zarkrith broke in with no resistance. They expected relics. Instead, they found rooms of weapons still warm to the touch, some breathing faintly, humming as if aware. In the center of the museum, the team found a sealed cryochamber labeled, in old Terran script, "Do not awaken, even if the stars die." That team didn't report back.